If you were to stand in the center of the Dasht-e-Lut desert in modern-day Iran during the height of July, you would be standing in one of the hottest places on the surface of the Earth. NASA satellites have recorded ground temperatures here exceeding 70 degrees Celsius. That is hot enough to fry an egg on a rock. It is hot enough to denature the proteins in your body. The sun here is a physical weight. It presses down on your shoulders, evaporating the moisture from your skin faster than you can bleed. In this environment, thirst is not a signal, it is a countdown clock. Now, imagine traveling back in time 2,400 years. You are a traveler on the Silk Road, exhausted, dehydrated, your lips cracked and bleeding. You arrive at a caravanserai in the ancient Persian Empire. You expect tepid water, maybe some shade, but instead a servant hands you a bowl. Inside the bowl, floating in a syrup of rose water and lime, is something that should not exist. It is clear, it is hard, and it is emitting a white mist of cold air. It is ice. This moment presents a paradox that breaks the mind. How, in an era 2,000 years before the invention of the electric compressor, before Freon, before the power grid, did a civilization create and store massive quantities of ice in the middle of a blast furnace? To the modern mind, ice requires electricity. But to the ancient engineers of Persia, ice required something else entirely. It required a mastery of physics, astronomy, and geology that we have largely forgotten. To survive the heat, they had to build a machine that defies modern logic. They had to turn the desert sun against itself. To understand the genius of the Yakhchāl, you must first understand the ferocity of the enemy. The enemy is thermal energy. In the desert, heat is relentless. It attacks from three directions: direct radiation from the sun, reflected radiation from the sand, and conduction from the hot air. Modern refrigeration works by brute force. We use electricity to pump heat out of a box. It is loud, expensive, and fragile. If the power grid fails today, our food rots within 48 hours. But the ancient Persians faced a harder reality. They needed to preserve food for armies, for royalty, and for survival during the lean months. They were dealing with the spoilage of meat, the souring of milk, and the spread of dysentery in warm water. They lived in a landscape where water was more precious than gold, and cold was a myth. The historical scene is the Achaemenid Empire. They were master builders, the people who built Persepolis. But their greatest challenge wasn't building palaces, it was conquering the climate. They realized that in the desert, nature provides a very specific, very fleeting window of opportunity. The desert is a land of extremes. While the days are lethal, the nights, specifically in winter, undergo a strange phenomenon. Because the air is so dry, there is no moisture to trap the heat. When the sun sets, the heat escapes straight up into the vacuum of space. The Persians realized that the night sky was not just dark, it was a gigantic heat sink. They realized that if they could connect the water on the ground to the cold of space, they could achieve the impossible. Imagine the first struggles of these desert engineers. Before the perfection of the Yakhchāl, they likely tried simple cellars. You dig a hole, you put snow in it, brought down from the mountains. But the mountains are far, and the transport is slow. By the time the mule train arrives, half the snow is water. When you bury it, the ground heat seeps in. The earth in the desert stays warm deep down. The sensory experience of these early failures would have been sickening. You open your storage pit in May, hoping for fresh meat preserved in snow, but you are hit with the smell of rot. The water has turned stagnant. The snow has melted into a muddy sludge. The precious resources used to haul that snow were wasted. They tried storing water in clay pots in the shade, but the ambient air temperature was still 40 degrees. Shade is not cold. Shade is just less hot. They needed a way to manufacture ice on site, at sea level, in the desert. And they needed a way to keep it frozen through a summer that could melt lead. They had to stop thinking about cooling things down and start thinking about how to stop things from heating up. They needed to create a thermodynamic shield. The turning point, the discovery that changed everything, was a manipulation of a physical principle called radiative cooling. The Persian engineers noticed that on clear, cloudless winter nights, puddles of water would sometimes freeze, even when the air temperature was slightly above freezing. This confused them at first. How can water freeze if the air is 4 degrees Celsius? The aha moment came when they understood that the water wasn't losing heat to the air, it was losing heat to the sky. The universe is minus 270 degrees Celsius. If you can shield the water from the warm ground and the wind and expose it only to the black sky, the heat leaves the water in the form of infrared radiation, traveling straight up. This led to the invention of the shadow wall. They realized they didn't just need a hole in the ground, they needed a massive wall running east to west. This wall would block the low winter sun from ever touching the ground on its northern side. This created a permanent shadow zone. In this shadow, they dug shallow, rectangular channels. They didn't fill them deep, they filled them shallow. This was the key. A massive body of water holds heat. A thin layer loses heat. They discovered that by pouring just a few centimeters of water into these channels at night, the radiative cooling would snap freeze it by morning. But discovering how to make the ice was the easy part. Keeping it from vanishing in July would require a material science revolution that would almost kill the workers who invented it. The deep dive into the engineering of the Yakhchāl begins with the mortar. You cannot build an ice house out of normal mud brick. Mud brick is porous, it absorbs water. If the melting ice soaks into the walls, the moisture freezes at night, expands and cracks the structure. The building would disintegrate. They needed a cement that was completely waterproof, incredibly hard, and an almost perfect thermal insulator. They created saruj. This was not just mud, it was a specific, proprietary chemical mixture. They took clay and limestone, dried and crushed. To this, they added ash from burnt baths to increase the binding. But then came the biological additives. They mixed in egg whites, thousands of them, to create a protein binder that made the mortar water repellent. They added goat hair to provide tensile strength, preventing cracks from thermal expansion. And they added cattails, a reed that creates microscopic air pockets within the mortar. The tactile sensation of mixing saruj was brutal. It had to be kneaded for days. If it wasn't mixed perfectly, it would fail. The workers would tread the mixture with their bare feet, feeling the texture change from a wet paste to a rubbery, clay-like putty. It was heavy, sticky work. Once applied and dried, saruj became harder than stone and smooth as glass. This material was the skin of the beast. It prevented the heat from conducting through the walls. But then, the crisis hits. You have your ice. You have your waterproof walls. But the summer storm arrives. In the desert, storms bring wind, and wind brings heat. A hot wind blowing over ice is like a hairdryer blowing on an ice cube. It melts it through convection. Furthermore, as the ice melts even a little, it creates humidity. Humidity is the enemy of the ice. If the air inside the storage pit becomes humid, the ice rots. It becomes slush. You are standing there watching your precious stockpile turn into a warm swimming pool. The pressure builds. The king expects ice for the royal court. The army expects preserved rations. The engineers realized that sealing the ice in a box wasn't enough. The ice needed to breathe, but it couldn't breathe the hot air from outside. But the craziest thing is, the stronger the wind blew, the safer the ice became. They realized they could use the wind against the heat. They integrated the Yakhchāl with the badgir, the wind catcher. The engineers refined the design into the iconic conical shape we see today. This wasn't an aesthetic choice, it was pure aerodynamics. The dome rises high, sometimes 20 meters into the air. At the very top, there is a small hole. At the base, there are small intake vents connected to the cool underground water tunnels known as qanats. Here is the genius of the design. Heat rises. As the small amount of air inside the dome warmed up, it rose to the top of the cone. The tapered shape accelerated this rising air, forcing it out of the small chimney at the apex. This is the Venturi effect. As the hot air exited the top, it created a low-pressure vacuum at the bottom. This vacuum pulled freezing cold air from the underground qanats and the base of the structure up through the ice pit. The ice was constantly bathed in a gentle, circulating breeze of chilled air. And the walls. At the base, the walls of a yakchal are 2 meters thick, 2 meters of saruj insulation. As the wall rises, it tapers, becoming thinner. This stepped design reduced the weight of the dome but also acted as a series of shelves for maintenance. The structure was a machine. It used the heat of the sun to drive the airflow that kept the ice cold. It was a passive geothermal engine. The test of survival comes in mid-July. The outside temperature is 50 degrees. The sand burns through the soles of your sandals. The air is so dry it crackles. You approach the massive adobe cone of the Yakhchāl. It sits there, silent, baking in the sun. It looks like a giant beehive. You enter through the heavy wooden door, insulated with thick wool. You descend the stairs. The Yakhchāl goes deep into the ground, often as deep as it is tall. This utilizes the insulation of the earth itself. As you step down, the light fades. The roar of the desert wind is muffled by the 2-meter thick walls. The sensory shift is violent. One moment, you are in an oven. The next, the air is sharp and biting. You can see your breath. At the bottom of the pit, stacked in layers, separated by straw and brushwood to prevent them from sticking together, are blocks of ice. They are dry. They are solid. The air smells of wet clay and clean frost. Despite the hellscape raging just 5 meters above your head, here, in the belly of the desert, it is winter. The system holds. The physics works. The result of this engineering was a revolution in desert living. The Persians could store ice from the winter well into the following autumn. They invented falude, a frozen dessert made of vermicelli noodles and rosewater syrup, the ancestor of modern ice cream, in 400 BC. But it was more than luxury. It was food security. They could preserve grape leaves, meats, and dairy. The Yakhchāl allowed cities like Yazd and Kerman to flourish in areas that should have been uninhabitable. The data confirms the efficiency. Measurements show that even on the hottest days, the temperature inside the bottom of a Yakhchāl stays consistently between -5 and +2 degrees Celsius. The load capacity was immense. Some pits could hold up to 5,000 cubic meters of ice. That is enough to supply a city for months. The saruj mortar proved so effective that many of these structures are still standing today, 2,000 years later, while modern concrete buildings crumble after 50 years. The Persian Yakhchāl is a masterclass in working with nature rather than fighting it. We solve problems today by adding energy. We make it cold by burning coal to run electric compressors. The Persians made it cold by understanding the sky, the wind, and the earth. They remind us that high technology doesn't always look like a microchip. Sometimes it looks like a pile of mud and egg whites arranged in the perfect geometry. They didn't have sensors or AI. They had observation and intuition. They understood that the resources they needed, the cold of space, the flow of wind, were free and infinite, if only they built the right vessel to catch them. We live in a fragile time where we are terrified of the power going out. The Yakhchāl stands in the desert as a silent reminder that humanity once thrived without the grid. It challenges us to look at our own environment and ask, what energy is flowing right past us that we are too blind to see? If you want to discover more forgotten ancient technologies that helped humanity survive, subscribe now and comment below. What type of ancient shelter should we explore next?